I used to think every family felt heavy, like that quiet pressure in your chest when you walked through the front door, the way conversations stopped when you entered a room, the way love felt conditional, something you earned by behaving correctly. I thought that was normal. My parents used to say I was their easy child, the one who never caused trouble, the one who didn't need much attention. For a long time, I wore that like a badge of honor. I was the oldest daughter. I learned early that being good meant being invisible. If I didn't ask questions, if I didn't complain, if I didn't cry too loud, then everything stayed peaceful. My mother liked peace. My father liked order, and I liked being loved. At least I thought I was loved. My younger brother Mark was different. He was loud, emotional, he broke things. He yelled, he demanded space, and somehow, no matter what he did, my parents bent around him like gravity shifted in his favor. If Mark failed a test, it was because the teacher didn't explain properly. If Mark screamed, it was because he was sensitive. If Mark hurt me, it was because I provoked him. If I cried, I was told to stop being dramatic. So I stopped crying. I learned to clean without being asked, to apologize even when I didn't understand what I'd done wrong, to smile when relatives praised me for being so mature for my age. By 12, I could sense my mother's mood the moment she walked into the house. By 14, I knew how to disappear into my room so no one would accuse me of adding stress. By 16, I felt guilty for needing anything at all. College was never really discussed. Not for me. Money was tight. Mark needed support. I could figure something out. And I did. I worked 2 part-time jobs. I went to community college. I commuted an hour each way. I sent money home whenever my mother said things were hard. She never asked directly. She didn't have to. I don't know how we'll pay the electric bill this month, she'd sigh. I guess we'll manage, she'd say, staring at the floor. So I managed. I moved out at 24, into a small apartment that smelled like old carpet and fried food from the downstairs neighbor. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. For the first time in my life, no one expected me to fix anything. And that's when the panic started. No one had warned me that when the noise stops, everything you've been holding in comes rushing out. I couldn't sleep. I felt guilty for resting, guilty for eating, guilty for not checking my phone every hour in case my family needed something. Therapy wasn't something my family believed in. People who go to therapy just want attention, my mother once said. Still, I went. The therapist asked me a question in our 3rd session that I couldn't answer. What happened when you were a child that taught you love had to be earned? I laughed reflexively. Then I cried so hard I had to stop the session early. Things might have stayed like that forever. Low contact, quiet guilt, manageable pain, if my mother hadn't called me one Tuesday night. Her voice sounded different, tight, controlled. Your father's been sick, she said. I felt that familiar drop in my stomach. How sick? A few tests. Nothing serious, she replied too quickly. But we need help. Help meant money. Help meant time. Help meant me. I took time off work. I drove back to the house I'd grown up in, the one that still smelled like lemon cleaner and unspoken rules. Everything looked the same couch, same photos on the wall, same family portrait where I stood slightly apart, hands folded, smiling too carefully. My father barely looked at me when I arrived. My mother hugged me for exactly 3 seconds. Mark didn't even come downstairs. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I went to the kitchen for water. The house creaked in the way it always had, like it was breathing. That's when I noticed the cabinet above the fridge was open. It had always been locked. When I was little, I once asked what was inside. My mother shut the door so hard it rattled. Private things, she said. Don't touch. Standing there decades later, staring at that open cabinet, I felt something I couldn't name. Not curiosity, not fear, recognition. Inside were old folders, envelopes, a small metal box. My name was written on one of the folders, not in my mother's handwriting, in my father's. I stood there for a long time, staring at my name on that folder. It felt invasive to touch it, like I was about to cross some invisible line that had been guarding me my whole life. But the cabinet was already open. Someone had already decided this secret wasn't staying hidden anymore. My hands shook as I pulled the folder down. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were documents, old ones, medical forms, school evaluations, typed reports yellowed with age. I didn't understand most of it at first. Dates, signatures, clinical language. But one phrase kept appearing. Behavioral assessment. Another page mentioned early childhood intervention. Another had my name followed by words I had never heard applied to me before. Emotional neglect. Parentification. Anxiety response consistent with prolonged stress. My chest tightened. These weren't recent. The dates went back decades. Some were from when I was 6, others from when I was 8. I sat at the kitchen table and kept reading. There was a report from a school counselor. Apparently, My third grade teacher had referred me after noticing that I never spoke in class, never asked for help, and flinched when adults raised their voices. The counselor had recommended family therapy. There was a note written by a pediatrician expressing concern about unequal treatment between siblings. My parents had signed every form, and then, on the last page, there was a decision. A typed summary signed by both my mother and my father, stating that formal intervention was unnecessary and could disrupt family stability. I felt sick. They knew. They hadn't been clueless. They hadn't been overwhelmed parents doing their best. They had been told, clearly, professionally, that something was wrong, and they chose to ignore it. I flipped through the rest of the cabinet, my heart pounding louder with every movement. Inside the metal box, I found old cassette tapes, each one labeled with dates and my name, audio recordings. I didn't play them. Not then, I couldn't. Footsteps sounded from upstairs. I froze. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes immediately locking onto the folder in my hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed, not in surprise, not in anger, in exhaustion. "So," she said quietly, "you found it." That broke something inside me. "You knew I'd find this one day?" I asked. She came into the kitchen and sat across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table. She didn't look at the papers. She didn't need to. "We hoped you wouldn't," she said. "But I suppose this was inevitable." I waited for her to say more. She didn't. "You let this happen," I said finally. "You were told. You knew." Her jaw tightened. "We did what we thought was best for the family." "For the family," I repeated. "Or for Mark." She flinched at his name. Mark had always been difficult. That was the word my parents used, difficult. As a child, he had violent tantrums. He broke toys. He screamed for hours. He threw chairs. He once pushed me down the stairs and said it was an accident. I was told not to bring it up again. According to one of the reports, a psychologist had suggested that Mark needed intensive behavioral therapy and that I needed protection from the constant chaos. My parents had declined. "He needed us," my mother said softly. "You were strong." I laughed. I couldn't help it. I was a child. "You were mature," she corrected. "You understood." No, I hadn't understood. I had adapted. I had learned that my needs were optional. "Do you know what this did to me?" I asked. "Do you know how many years I've spent thinking there was something wrong with me?" She looked down at her hands. "We thought you'd forget," she said. "That hurt more than anything else. You thought I'd forget my entire childhood." "You were happy," she insisted weakly. "You did well in school. You didn't complain." Because I learned that complaining made things worse. Because every time I spoke up, I was told I was making things harder. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the cassette tapes. In the morning, while my parents were still asleep, I took one. I drove back to my apartment and sat on the floor, staring at the old player I'd bought secondhand years ago and never used. I pressed play. At first, there was static. Then a small voice. Mine. I was 7 years old. I was describing my brother's screaming. I was saying I felt scared. I was saying I tried to be good so Mommy wouldn't be upset. There was a long pause. Then an adult voice, calm, professional, asking me if I ever felt unsafe. And my tiny voice answered, "Only when he's angry." I turned it off. I didn't need to hear more. The memories started coming back after that. Not like scenes from a movie, more like sensations. Tightness in my chest, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the instinct to stay quiet. I remember the night Mark locked me in the bathroom, the time he broke my favorite book because I wouldn't give him the TV remote, the way my parents always explained his behavior but never explained mine. I had been protecting everyone since I could talk. The next day, my father finally spoke to me. "We didn't mean to hurt you," he said. That sentence followed me for weeks, because intention doesn't erase damage. I left that house knowing something I could never unknow. My family hadn't just failed me. They had chosen who mattered more, and I was done being the easy one. I didn't cut my family off immediately. I want to be honest about that, because I think people imagine clarity arrives all at once. Like you discover the truth and suddenly everything becomes easy. It doesn't. For a while, I tried to act like nothing had changed. I answered texts. I called once a week. I listened while my mother complained about money and my father's health and Mark's job stress, but something fundamental had shifted. Every conversation felt hollow, like we were acting out old roles in a play I no longer believed in. The guilt didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became sharper, more focused, less about what I owed them and more about what they had taken from me. My therapist noticed it before I did. "You're grieving," she said. "I didn't lose anyone," I replied. She shook her head. "You lost the family you thought you had." That hit harder than anything else. A few weeks later, my mother called and asked if I could help pay for another medical bill. The request was casual, almost automatic. And for the first time in my life, I didn't say yes. I can't, I said. There was a pause. You always manage, she replied. I'm not managing anymore, I said. I'm surviving. There's a difference. Her tone changed instantly. So this is punishment? She asked. For something that happened decades ago? It didn't happen to me decades ago, I said. I lived with it every day. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning family, of rewriting history to make myself a victim. I hung up shaking. That night I wrote a letter I never sent. I wrote about the child who learned early that love had conditions, about the adult who felt guilty for resting, about the girl who was praised for being strong when what she needed was help. I realized something while I was writing. They had never apologized because apologizing would mean admitting they were wrong, and they couldn't afford that any more than they could afford my therapy. All those years ago, the final break came on a holiday. I drove home because I thought maybe time had softened things. Maybe distance had given us perspective. It hadn't. Mark was there with his girlfriend. My parents hovered around him, doting, proud. They barely noticed when I arrived. During dinner, my mother made a comment about how some people hold on to the past too much. She looked directly at me when she said it. Something inside me went very calm. I didn't hold on to the past, I said. You buried it. The table went silent. My father cleared his throat. This isn't the time. It's always the time, I said. Just never for me. They told me I was being unfair, dramatic, that families make hard choices. Yes, I said, and I was the sacrifice. My mother started crying, real tears this time. I gave up so much for you, she said. I nodded. You gave up me. No one argued after that. When I left that night, I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in the driveway. I just felt done. The silence that followed was terrifying at first. No constant checking. No guilt-driven phone calls. No unspoken expectations hanging over my head. Then, slowly, it became peaceful. I learned what rest actually felt like. I learned how to say no without explaining myself. I learned that being strong doesn't mean being silent. I stopped defining myself by how useful I was to others. Months later, my mother sent a message. I hope you're happy. I read it several times. Then I replied honestly, I'm learning how to be. She never answered. Sometimes I still grieve. Not for them. Exactly, but for the version of me that never got to be a child without responsibility. But I don't regret leaving, because love that only exists when you're convenient isn't love. And being the good daughter cost me more than I ever realized.